welcome to the 19th episode of the Employee to Boss podcast. I'm your host, Hayleigh Hayhurst. I'm the owner of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency specializing in editing, marketing, and strategy. So I was having a really interesting conversation about how you can use your podcast in a couple different ways with a potential sponsor that I will hopefully be announcing soon. And it really got me thinking about there's so many different ways that you can actually use your podcast. And I think when people think about starting a podcast, they think it's all or nothing. They think it has to be every single week or multiple episodes a week. And it's a constant grind. But in reality, you can set up your podcast in whatever way feels best to you. And this is what I tell my clients all the time. You know, I help people start their own podcasts. And what I hear from them a lot is, I don't know if I can commit to weekly. And that is totally okay. If you go back to the third episode that I ever put out with Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, he has had a podcast for I think 13 years, and he only puts out one episode a month. And it's the consistency that has gotten him to where he is today. An expert in the field, like, you can have as many episodes as you would like. It's pretty common now to have seasons. So I have a client, Ronit Plank, who just launched 2 podcasts, and she is doing a mini series for both of them. It's going to be about 10 episodes each, which is very, very digestible. It's very, very doable. You can put out 2 episodes a month. You can put out 2 episodes a week. You can put out 1 episode a week like I do, whatever feels good to you. You have to really put into consideration a couple different things, such as how much time you have to commit, your social media, what that looks like, and if, you can fit 4 extra posts in there a month. And this is really what I want to talk about, the different ways that you can use your podcast as a tool to promote your brand. So your podcast can either be your brand or it can help promote your brand. And what I mean by this is my podcast, Employee to Boss. I use this to promote my brand. My brand is Espresso Podcast Production, and I help entrepreneurs and businesses launch their podcasts, do their production, and marketing as well. I coach on marketing. And so I use this podcast as a tool to get in front of the potential audience that I may have. When someone hires me to edit their podcast, they obviously want to hear what my style is, what my editing sounds like. They want to hear what I'm editing out and really how I present myself. So my main goal with this podcast is not to have thousands and thousands of listeners. It's not to be in the top 10 business list. It's really to help me grow my brand and have a working portfolio of what I can do. And of course, I would love to grow my podcast, but it's not my number one priority. And I know by pushing myself to, put out episodes and do the marketing, which I already do because that is also my brand. But if my goal was to get in the top 10, that would just not feel good to me. And so I have clients that I help who want to be in the new and noteworthy. They want to hit those top 10 and their strategy is different, and I help them with that too. So there's no right or wrong way to have a podcast. It really is whatever works for you. The other aspect of this is your podcast can be your whole brand. So I have also worked with podcasters who aren't selling a service. They're not selling a product. They're just looking to get sponsors and talk about things that they love. So, for instance, they are using their podcast just for fun as a hobby at first, and then they want to grow that into a business. So unlike me and a lot of my clients, they don't have a business. Their podcast is their business. And so when you're starting a podcast, you really want to think about, is this a standalone thing? Is this going to be on its own? And that is totally okay if it is. that's what you want to do. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. The only thing that I want you to think about when you're starting a podcast is your goals and your strategy. So think about it this way. This is what I tell all of my potential clients. I offer podcast audits that you can book through my website, espressopodcastproduction.com. And the first question I always ask is, what are your goals? Every podcast host is going to have a different goal. My goals will be different from my clients' goals. Their goals will be different from a different industry's goals. Like, every single person will have a different goal. And for me to be able to coach you on the right strategy, it's super important for me to know where you are, where you want to get to, what you want that to look like, all of that. So here's what I want you to do with the remainder of this episode. I want you to pause me right here and write down your podcast goals. Write down 3, 5, however many, and they can be as crazy as you think. It can be you want to be on the top 10 podcast list. You want to be number 1 on New and Noteworthy. You want to get 10,000 listeners per episode. You want to make 6 figures from your podcast in 3 years. Like, you can make these goals as high as you want, because that's what will get you movement. That's what will get you closer to these goals. It'll give you a big vision to keep up with. And so on those days you're feeling uninspired, you can think, okay, well, if I do this one thing today, if I reach out to this one sponsor today, then in 6 months, I might be making $500 a month. And then the following 2 months, I could be doubling that and tripling that. And you will see those small things start to add up. And that's really, really exciting. And that's what I want for you. So write down those goals and be as creative as you want. Okay, the next thing I want you to do is think about how often you can post. And so this is going to be different if your podcast is your brand versus if your podcast is to support your brand. For me, if I was to put out 1 episode a day, my Instagram feed would not be what it is. I want to provide a lot of podcast information, a lot of podcast tips, hacks, whatever you want to call it, on my Instagram, so people can scroll through and consume some amazing quick wins, some quick tips. And so if your podcast is your whole brand, then you're going to want to have a lot of content. Where I see this fall through a lot is, the difference is, I have a ton of posts outside of my podcast, outside of these episodes. I have a lot of things to post. But if your podcast is your whole brand, then your podcast is the only thing that you will be posting. Of course, I don't want you to just post when you have a new episode out, or a quote card, or an audiogram, or whatever it may be. I want you to actually think about what you're going to post, what it's going to look like, and what you can do outside of these episodes that will start seeing movement on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it may be. And so think about how often you want to put out episodes and what type of content you want to post. This is where these podcast audits come in a lot, because it's kind of hard to think about, oh, I want to have a podcast talking about something totally unrelated from my career. Maybe you work a 9-to-5 and you want to use this as a creative outlet, but you're not sure what to post outside of those announcement posts, is what we'll call them. This is where you really need to think, like, where can you add value outside of each episode? Or what can you repurpose from the episodes to create new content from it? Always repurpose. That is my favorite thing. Okay, so pause me here and then write down what you want to post and how often you want to put out episodes. An example of someone who kind of has a mixture of a business and a podcast is one of my favorite podcasts, The Mindset Mentor, from Rob Dial Jr. He puts out 3 episodes a week, but he also is a coach for other coaches. And so if you're looking for some inspiration, definitely go check out his page and how he incorporates 3 episodes a week in with also selling his course. And another big question that I ask during these podcast audits are, what makes your podcast stand out different than all of the other podcasts in your industry? So for me, there are tons of other business podcasts out there. Tons and tons and tons. Probably, I can't even fathom how many business podcasts are out there. But what makes mine different is I focus on how to start your business for new business owners and also how to incorporate a podcast into your business with these solo episodes. And so that's what makes my podcast stand out. And so that's what my messaging is. That is what I promote, all of that. So think about it for you. What is it for you that makes yours stand out? And there's no wrong answer. And the answer could honestly be as simple as you, me, whatever it is. Like, I'm what makes my podcast stand out. No other podcast is created by me. No other podcast is hosted by me. I'm the only one that's sharing these exact words, this exact tone, this exact message. And that could be your brand as well. So you are special, and that is why your podcast is special as well. So this has been a lot of information about the difference between using your podcast as your brand and your podcast to support your brand or to market your brand or to promote your brand, all of those things. One other thing that I will note is if you have a podcast to support your brand or to market your brand, put in commercials for your own products. So starting next week, you'll start to hear some commercials from the courses that I'm creating. You'll start to hear some commercials voiced over by me about my business, my products, all of that. And I think this is really powerful because we're so quick to get that paycheck. We're so quick to accept that money to start supporting other people's dreams through commercials. All of these podcasts out there that have HelloFresh as sponsors, and it doesn't align with their podcast vision, mission, goals, all of those things. They sometimes are just doing it because it's an easy income and they're not really adding value to their audience through that. I could find a million sponsors out there, but I only want to work with sponsors who you all as listeners will actually value from. So if you have your own business or have a service, product, whatever you want to sell, definitely put your own commercial in there. My course that's out right now is about how to be a podcast guest. It is super informational and educational, and we have 5 levels that I really want to teach. The first one is knowing your story. So you need to get clarity of what you want out of the podcast, and I'll teach you how to do that. You want to narrow down your topic and your messaging. This is perfect if you have so many passions, but you don't know how to combine them all into one podcast topic. The third level is finding podcasts to guest star on. This is one of the things that holds a lot of people back. They don't know how to connect with the hosts. They don't know where to even get booked. This is really the valuable part because I share everything you need to know. The fourth level is setting up your audio. So this is how you can, get rid of your imposter syndrome, because that's another thing that holds people back. You're worrying about, is my podcast even going to sound good? Is my guest spot even going to sound good? Are they even going to post it? So I'll show you exactly how you can look and sound professional when it comes to being a guest. Level 5 is preparing to record. So this can be one of the scariest parts, but I show you step by step how to overcome your fears. And then level 6 is the bonus episode, and this one is marketing. So how you can actually use being a podcast guest to your benefit, because you may be on podcasts, you may be on, multiple podcasts a month or one a month or whatever it may be. But if you're not actually promoting it and you're not using it as leverage to get on more podcasts, to grow your audience, all of those things, it's not going to get you the results that you want to see as quickly as you can. So you can find this course in the show notes. I am super, super excited about it. And the people who have gone through it already have been booked on podcasts. They have given me such amazing testimonials. And it really gets rid of all of the fear that you may be having about being on a podcast. So That's the detailed version of what the commercials will be, but you can find that all in the show notes. So if you have any questions about anything I spoke about today or want to book one of those podcast audits, check out my website or send me a DM. I'm mainly hanging out on Instagram at Espresso Podcast Production, or you can join my Facebook group. It's called Espresso Growth for podcasters, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders. We are almost at 600 members, and I am so stoked about it because it's just full of people who want to be on podcasts, who have podcasts, who are looking for guests. Like, it's a really amazing and supportive community. So definitely check that out and come connect with me on any of those platforms. Today has been super fun, and I will be back next week with a super exciting guest, so stay tuned for that. Talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to the Employee to Boss podcast. If you made it to the end of this episode, I hope that you implement the actionable steps from this week's experts so you can get started with your business today. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Employee to Boss podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps more than you could ever imagine. Remember, a little progress each day leads to big results. We come out with a new episode every Tuesday. To access our show notes, transcripts, and courses, please check out espressopodcastproduction.com.